You said before that you wanted to sort of re-establish the centrality of storytelling to the books we read. And anyone who heard you read just then and has read your books knows that you're the master storyteller. I don't know how you keep all of the stories together going in your head and on the page, but you must have been born into a sea of stories.
Well, you know, one of the great things about growing up in the Indian tradition is that you grow up with these wonderful tales. You know, I mean, the Arabian Nights, it's not very well known that the Arabian Nights are actually Arabic translations of stories that started out in India. That many of these stories were originally Indian stories, which were then translated first into Persian in a collection called the Hazar Afsana, or the Thousand Stories, and from that into Arabic. And so it all comes from India, really. And then you see the Arabian Nights was translated very well into Spanish and was read by Latin American writers, and out of that comes magic realism. So it all begins in India. And if you grow up with that tradition, I mean, many more stories, of course, you know, Sinbad and Aladdin, all that, but many, many more. You grow up with those as children and you begin to know them. And then, of course, you have the great Hindu narrative tradition of the kind of Hindu stories. Nowadays, it's wonderful for children because there's this enormous number of comic books which illustrate, which take on, you know, the various stories of the Mahabharata and the Ramayana and the Panchatantra and so on, and turn them into comic book stories so children grow up knowing these stories. But so did we to a certain extent.
Who told you stories?
My father told me versions of them, I guess, when I was a child, and my mother had another gift. My mother was a world-class gossip. and had in her head enormous architectures of misdeed, you know. and like all really great gossips, she couldn't keep her mouth shut, you know. So she would spill all these beans. And there was a point, actually, where she said to me, I'm going to stop telling you stuff because you put it in your book so that I get in trouble. But
are you a gossip too?
No, I just put it in the books. No, I'm actually very good at keeping my mouth shut. Probably because I saw how much trouble my mother would get into. But so from my mother, I got this contemporary narrative of secrets, you know, and from my father, I got this other, more kind of classical stuff. But
were you a dreamy story, head in book kind of boy?
Yeah. No, I was very much a big reader as a kid, yeah. And I wanted people, I don't actually remember this, but my parents used to tell me that I would say when their friends asked me what I wanted to do when I grew up, that I wanted to be a writer. And I think, actually, as I say, I can't remember saying it, but I'm sure they were telling the truth. And I mean, it's, you know, I think it doesn't, a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 12-year-old boy doesn't know what that means. You know, when you say, I want to be a writer, you don't know what you're saying, you know. So I think what you mean, if you say such a thing, is that you love to be a reader, you know, and that you want to inhabit that world, you know. And I did love to be a reader. And I think, you know, I think almost all the writers that I know started out as big readers. I think the only exception I've ever heard to that rule, if I may mention his name, is V.S. Naipaul, who at the Hay Festival, years ago, I was sitting at the Hay Festival watching him being interviewed by Bill Buford, if I remember rightly, and Bill asked him about a similar question to the one you've asked me about, you know, what did he read and what were the books that shaped him, and et cetera, et cetera. And he said rather magnificently, he said, I'm not a reader, I'm a writer. So, but with the exception of Sir Vidya, the rest of us are readers too.